Hello. In this third presentation, we will continue discussing strategies that can be used to develop effective paragraphs. In the previous video, we examined the use of narration and description as writing strategies. Here, we will take a closer look at 5 new strategies as means to develop your ideas. These are examples, illustrations, facts, statistics, and reasons. These development strategies can be used to inform, explain, convince, or persuade your reader. Let's begin with the example. We could say that an example is a specific instance, a sample that you decide to use in a text to show the nature or the character of something. An example can be very short, or it can be expanded. Consider the following sentences as the abbreviated or short form of an example. High unemployment rate is an example of the government's inability to cope with the work issue in Canada. Or, Beethoven's 9th Symphony is a perfect example of classical music. You will use a brief example when your reader is familiar with it and when it evokes immediately the theme you are discussing. For instance, if your reader knows a great deal about the different movements of modern art, citing Picasso's paintings as an example of the Cubist movement might be sufficient. On the other hand, if your reader is not familiar with modern art, you will have to develop your example in detail so that your reader may understand the subject clearly. Picasso's paintings are a perfect example of Cubism in modern art. Indeed, by drawing multiple angles of a same object simultaneously on a canvas, Picasso showed his interest in the fragmentation of the image and hence reality, a characteristic of Cubism. Let's take another theme, drugs. Your reader is familiar with drugs and is quite knowledgeable about hard and soft drugs and the effects they have on the person who takes drugs. If you wish to give an example of a hard drug that can have lethal effects, it will be sufficient to say, cocaine, for instance, can be a killer drug. However, if your reader is not familiar with drugs and does not know the difference between soft and hard drugs, or their physical and psychological effects, you will have to make use of a detailed example. Cocaine, for instance, can be a killer drug. Indeed, this alkaloid extract of coca is a drug that excites the nervous system and can attack the brain. When taken on a regular basis, it creates dangerous addiction that can result in death. To make examples effective as a development strategy, make sure you integrate them smoothly into your text. To introduce examples in a paragraph, use constructions such as these. For example, A further example is exemplified by, for instance, an instance is specifically such as this point is illustrated in, an illustration of this point is. Examples are used as a writing strategy for different purposes, but the most common ones are probably to explain or to convince your reader. Let's say you wish to explain the way the nobles dressed in medieval times. A statement such as, in medieval Europe, nobles had beautiful and extravagant clothing, will indicate that noble clothing was rich. But an example will help you visualize this extravagance. Medieval knights and nobles wore magnificent costumes made of expensive fabric, such as imported silks and rich velvet. Ladies, for instance, wore mink capes adorned with jewelry, exotic bird feathers, and silk ribbons. This vivid, specific, and relevant example clarifies your point and maintains your reader's interest. Now, let's say that your purpose is to convince your reader. You wish, for example, to persuade people that poverty in a society is not a barrier to education. You will narrow down your abstract argument into concrete examples that will enable your reader to understand your argument better. Consider this. Finland, for instance, is one of the poorest nations in Europe, but it has splendid schools, and its citizens are far more cultivated than those of many a richer nation. A further example is Scotland. Although never wealthy, she has supported 4 universities ever since the Renaissance. Cuba is yet another perfect example. Despite its critical economical situation, the country maintains free access to university for everyone. If you decide to use examples as a development strategy for a paragraph, remember the following. Make sure your example supports the general point, representative. Make sure your examples cover a broad range of cases. Explain the meaning of your examples, detail. Integrate your examples smoothly, connecting words.